Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today in the first session of the ICN Inter-Council Network webinar series towards a more decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist public engagement. I'm Ghazwa Wourghi Saada, and I'm the ICN National Program Manager. Before we begin the webinar, in all the online platforms, there are a few technical items that we need to discuss and note. We have simultaneous interpretation available. To select your preferred language, you will find a globe icon at the bottom of your screen for the interpretation, which you can use to select the language you'd like to listen to. Nous avons l'interprétation simultanée. Alors, pour
We have simultaneous interpretation available for this meeting. To choose the language that you prefer, you should see an icon of a globe at the bottom of the screen. You can click on that and choose the language of your choice that you would want to listen in.
If you have any difficulties with the interpretation, closed captioning, or any other technical issues, please reach out to us in the chat and we'll do our best to help resolve them as quickly as possible. Before we begin, avant de commencer, j'aimerais vous présenter brièvement.
Before we get started, I wanted to briefly present the Intercouncil Network, ICN. ICN is a coalition that brings together the 8 provincial and regional councils for international cooperation. These councils fight to promote social justice and social change around the world and represent more than 350 civil society organizations from all across the country, from ocean to ocean. The councils are leaders in public engagement, and the network provides them with a national platform that allows them to collaborate, improve their efficiency, identify common priorities in terms of collective action. To learn more about the network's work, please visit our website or follow us on social media. We've shared the links in the chat.
Finally, before we delve into today's content, we would like to acknowledge that we are hosting this webinar in Mi'kma'ki. This is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, which Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy people first signed with the British Crown in 1726. We ask we all consider this and the land on which we walk as we participate in today's webinar. We feel it is important to keep this in mind and know and honor the land that we're on. The ICN works with many communities across Canada, including First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities, as well as communities around the world in the international development sector. And we feel it's important to reflect on this, draw lessons from our colonial history and how this history intersects with in many ways with the issues we are facing today in working towards a more just, equitable, and sustainable world. I would like also to remind you about 2 important days in this month. In September 23rd, we will have Day of Climate Action, but also in September 30th, we will have National Day for Truth and Reconciliation. For the webinar, we will start with an introduction of the speakers. Then we will hear about ICN's research projects, key findings, followed by discussion with the panelists. We will end with the Q&A session. Please use the chat to introduce yourselves and comment on today's topic. Any harmful, disrespectful, or inappropriate language or comments will not be tolerated. You may also use the Q&A function later to address any questions to the speakers. Today's webinar will be moderated by MJ. MJ Torres. MJ was born in Colombia. She moved to Canada in 2017 as an international student and got a degree in environmental management. Currently, she works as an analyst at Upswing Solutions and as a youth advisor for the Canadian Council for Youth Prosperity and Vibrant Healthcare Alliance, helping people with disabilities. In the past, MJ has worked with several nonprofits too. At the beginning of 2022, she was accepted in the Youth Champions Program by Spur Change, where she learned how social and environmental justice intersect. Thanks to the program, she was able to develop her own climate justice project to illustrate the disproportional effects of climate change in certain regions and communities. MJ is happy to be part of conversations that focus on building a better world. Over to you, MJ.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Joshua. I want to welcome all the panelists and also for you to say your name and also to share with us what lessons or takeaways also to share with us what lessons or takeaways you took part from this research. Hi, Kimmy. You are muted, Kimmy.
Perdón.
Apologies. I am Kimi Rojas from Migrantes Transgresores Collective, the IU Colectivo as well. And I think I can acknowledge the importance of exchanges with different collectives around the world. This has been very fruitful. We as collective, we have strengthened ourselves based on this exchange. And we actually need to work harder and harder. We need to be always ready to create new activities to enhance our alliances because we face harsh conditions. So these special conditions and meetings and events are pretty important to all of us.
Thank you, Kimmy. You can go ahead, Sonia.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sonia Audi. I'm from Kenya. I am active within the LGBTQ plus and human rights space in Kenya. And I think a key lesson that I got from this entire process was the importance of context. Yeah, that sometimes in our work, we tend to focus a lot on our own context, especially in when you come from for myself in Kenya, there's this kind of segregation around issues. So we tend to focus, if you're working on environmental issues, you just focus on environmental issues. If you're working on human rights issues, you tend to focus only on that. But within this space, I think it was a reminder also to see the intersectionality of things, right? And that also, it enriches the kind of work that we do because now all systems of oppression are interconnected. And that was my key takeaway. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. Thank you, Sonia.
Thank
you
you,
can go ahead,
Sonia.
bienvenida.
Buenas, sí, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon to all of
Mendoza,
you.
de República
Bienvenida Mendoza from the Dominican Republic, sorry. This has been an excellent experience. It was quite positive to meet with other colleagues from different parts around the world, from different cultures, and try to find out the commonalities on racial issues and different issues discussed. I think this has been quite important. It is important to have people debate on race and social cultural differences, racism, gender, power, which are different elements that are part of our struggle within our own countries. I think this has been pretty enlightening. I thank and welcome the different organizations who have been part of these meetings because we need to come together. We have seen it, similar situations that repeat over and over again in different contexts. Thanks.
Thank you, bienvenida. You can go ahead, Paula.
Bueno, gracias. Hola, yo soy Paola.
Thank you. My name is Paula from Bolivia. I work in a small organization with quite active participants. We study and exchange and create new different ways of intervention. We work together with the Amazonian women, with all those community members that have been affected and impacted by mega projects. To be part of this space, to me, meant a lot. There were lots of different knowledges and questions that were shared. And on our daily basis, we reflect on all these different points. We ask ourselves so many questions, and sometimes we do not have a clear answer to them. But in these specific spaces, we can look at them, reflect on them, try to find solutions or responses to them, and build something larger, bigger. Sometimes we do not necessarily know how to call or name ourselves, and those are things that are easy to share within the safe spaces, especially based on our daily experiences. So this has been a really important space. It was important for me to reflect on those different issues and to formulate new questions, to reflect on those new thoughts. And that's it, basically. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula. Okay, so now we're getting into our sauce. I'm gonna be asking the first question, which is, given the misinformation, disinformation, contestation, and co-optation around these concepts, there is an urgent need for more discourse focusing on these concepts. Part of this includes raising awareness among the public. But do we need to keep in mind as we raise awareness about decolonization, anti-racism, and feminism?
I'm just gonna interrupt for a minute here. MJ will do the
I'm so sorry.
okay. We'll do a quick presentation of some of the findings first, and then we'll get into the discussion. How does that sound? Okay. Hello, everyone. I will be telling you about the research. If we can go ahead and share some slides there. Okay. Thank you so much. So my name is Judy Annette. I am the ICN Policy Officer. It's good to see everyone here. So I'm sure most of you know a little bit about this research project that we'll be talking about today. But just to recap, today we only have 4 of the participants, but we had a total of 13 participants join us for this research project. And we started at the beginning of the year, January through June. And now we are in a position to share some of the findings from our research. So as I said, we had 13 participants from the countries that you can see listed here, and some of the participants work across nonprofits, feminist collectives, activist groups, and and you get to hear from some of them today. And so for today, we'll share just a few of the key findings that came from this work, and we'll be sharing more detailed findings later. So if you wanna get that information, you should probably sign up for a newsletter, and you'll be notified when we share reports and other works that came from this piece of research. So if we go to the next slide. Thank you. So I would just touch on a few of the key findings, and then we'll get right into the discussion. So one of the things that came from this research project is that it's important to understand some of the obstacles that are hindering our use of either decolonial, anti-racist, or feminist approaches in public engagement. And in our research, we find that one of the biggest challenges is coloniality. And by coloniality, we mean the ongoing effects of colonialism in current systems and structures. And this is evident especially in how the international cooperation sector operates currently. So the coloniality of being, of gender, of knowledge and power, they all act together to influence efforts in decolonization, for example, anti-racism and feminism. And this can be seen in different spaces. For example, how the public perception of these three concepts, it can also be seen in how resources are invested in this work. So in this research, therefore, we find that the first thing that actors need to do is to map the obstacles that prevent their use of these approaches. And this involves drawing connections between broader structural factors, for example, coloniality, to more specific organizational policies, practices, and even processes. So for example, this involves looking at your hiring policies, your funding practices, your community engagement practices, things like that. And after identifying these obstacles, then we can move on to how to address some of these challenges. If we can go to the next slide. Thank you. So I'm just going to preface this by saying that how we address obstacles is very contextual, as Sonia mentioned there at the beginning. Context is everything. So these are just some of the key action areas that came from this work, but you should definitely tailor this to your specific context. So I have a few things there. And the first one is a critical power analysis exercise. So if we want to change unequal power relations that exist within this sector and even within our organizations themselves, the first thing that we need to do is to address structural factors that hinder our use of decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist approaches. And this involves doing a bit of your evaluation of power dynamics within your organization. And for this to be effective, it has to be accompanied by intentional shifts in power dynamics. So within your organization, but also within the communities and the public that you seek to engage. And so that's one of the key areas of action. The next one that we have there is language. So to understand how we got here, and by here I mean this racist, colonial, imperial, patriarchal systems that we are in right now, language is a good resource. We need to, first of all, we need to understand and articulate and make sense of these colonial histories that continue to shape our sector and how we work. So we can use language for that. We can also use language to cultivate alternative systems. And this is where things like dignified storytelling, for example, comes in. So to use language for change, we can look at language that is being used by activists, feminist organizers, like some of the speakers that we have today in the majority world. And this is not to co-opt their language, but to learn from them. So the third one that I have there is building relations of trust and solidarity. As we've seen in our research, this work cannot be done in isolation, and I think the speakers here would agree with me. So we'll have to connect our efforts in decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist work in public engagement to broader processes of social justice. So in other words, our use of these approaches in public engagement has to be in conversation with other social justice projects, and also with the organizations and communities that are involved in this project. And this requires fostering relations of trust and solidarity. So, and I'm sure my colleagues will speak to some of these issues in more detail shortly. So I will stop there for now. Thank you so much. And I will pass it back to MJ, who will lead our conversation today. Thank you.
Hi, Janet. Sorry about the whole taking you off the spotlight. Okay, so now I am going to start asking some questions, and the first one is, given the misinformation, disinformation, contestation, and cooptation around these concepts, there is an urgent need for more discourse focusing on these concepts. Part of this includes raising awareness among the public. What do we need to keep in mind as we raise awareness about decolonization, anti-racism, and feminism?
Do you want to select someone?
Sonia, did you want to say something? Not to put you on the spotlight. I just saw that you unmuted yourself and said,
Yeah, actually it was technical difficulties. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yeah. Sorry, kindly repeat your question.
The third is a charm, right?
Yeah.
Given the misinformation, disinformation, contestation, and cooptation around these concepts, there's an urgent need for more discourse focusing on these concepts. Part of this includes raising awareness among the public. What do we need to keep in mind as we raise awareness about decolonization, anti-racism, and feminism?
Yeah, I think one thing that we need to constantly have at the back of our heads is the power relations. And it's something that came up over and over again, like power relations between the North and the South, power relations between donors and people being funded, between organizations and the people they serve, between even organizations and the public. And a key question that kept coming up and something I've been pondering about was the question of who has the power. And a key takeaway for me from this process was that all of us have power in one way or another, right? And it's then the question becomes, what kind of power do we wield then? Like, do we have the power to cause more harm? Do we have the power to create change? How then do we use that power? So in engaging all this, I think in trying to see our position, like where we stand in the whole of this in the whole of this conversation, whether we're decolonizing, whether it's feminism, we're doing whatever work we're doing at the back of our heads. When we have the conversation of who has the power, I think it makes us ask very pertinent questions around relations. A second thing is also a multi-sectoral approach to all of this. Like I said, for example, in Kenya, we have this issue of segregating issues, right? Like if I'm working on climate change, it's just climate change. I can't work on other things. But once we understand how all of these systems are interconnected, how even when we talk about colonialism and we talk about neocolonialism and feminism and everything, how they're interconnected, then we start to see why it's important to apply a multi-sectoral approach to or a multi-sectoral problem-solving approach to this situation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sonia. And I'm sorry about putting you on the spotlight, but you really didn't want to talk, but it was a great intervention. Who wants to go next? Go ahead, bienvenida.
Sí, bueno, gracias. Bueno, es muy importante eso.
Thank you. It's very important to take into account all the elements that were mentioned by Sonia. I think that we need to take into consideration that this fight has to be clear. It's an anti-racist fight. It's against the system. So it has to be systematic. There's a difference between these two words, a difference that implies to strengthen each and every group that is involved in this kind of work. All the organizations, the communities, if we don't strengthen our position and if we're not clear about where we stand regarding decolonization, it's going to be a bit more problematic. We need to work towards removing all forms of colonialism. I work with both men and women. I've been a feminist for over 30 years, but throughout the years, I came to understand that if we don't work together, we will not achieve our purposes. It's all about living together, and both men and women, we share this territory. We need to work together. I generally work with young people, with teenagers, so that they start learning how to achieve this integrated approach, so that they understand the impact of colonialism, and so that they can understand how important it is to change this. This is why the mention of the context is so important. Sonia mentioned the context. All this way of covering these situations favors individualism. This idea of I'd rather save myself, fix my own problem in an individual way. This will not allow for a systematic and collective way of working. We need to work together to fight colonialism, to fight racism, so that we can achieve our purposes, our common purposes.
Gracias, bienvenida. That was a great intervention.
Thank you, bienvenida.
As well. Who wants to go next?
Si les parece, puedo ser yo.
Go ahead.
Okay, Kimi.
I could intervene. I would also like to mention that along the same lines as what Sonia and Bienvenida presented, historical memories that are involved with this ability of fighting. Our ancestors had generated this. We are fighting here in present time, but we do have a past, a history that was lived by our ancestors. We need to use all this to come up with strategies that would allow us to resist, to say it somehow, all the forms of colonialism, all forms of racism or chauvinism, all these oppression. And we can see this too in the diaspora. And within the LGBT communities, we need to understand that a certain situation will not change suddenly, but we need a well-established process. We need a clear setting. And as Bienvenida said before, we need to take into consideration the crossing points that are not related only with the race, but also with geopolitical issues, with immigration processes, the context of the different colonialistic processes, how this is related to feminism, how this is related to the different communities. Again, it's a process. We need to understand this. And we need to try to break with this binary approach. We need to do this in order to create new possibilities, new options, and include all stances in our fight. Thank you.
Gracias, Kimi. It was also
Thank you, Kimi.
great intervention. So last but not least, Paula, do you want to say your piece?
Bueno, sí, pensando en la pregunta, el tema
Thank you. Yes. Regarding reconciliation, I'm a bit conflicted because I think that we're still working, we're still reviewing this in our organization. We're still studying it internally. We're seeing what our stances are regarding the way of naming this and establishing our practices. We need, as our other speakers mentioned before, we need a clear process. We need to take into consideration historic memory. And this, I believe, is going to take a long time. We need to think about this for a long time still. I feel that we're still going through this process, which is why I'm still conflicted. I do have to say, however, that Bienvenida's participation was, I found it to be very, very, very nice.
Tal vez organizaciones así pequeñas, ¿no? En relaciones.
We need to take into consideration the approaches of all small organizations. Regardless of the size of the organizations, they still have the ability to work together. And I think this is a good starting point. It's a good starting point to work together. Thank you.
Gracias, Paula.
Thank you, Paula.
You know, I'm really happy because I'm also learning a lot, and that's great. But let's continue. The second question is critical reflexivity, the ability to reflect on our ethics and actions, is fundamentally important in our use of these approaches in public engagement. What are some key things that we should keep in mind while doing critical reflexivity exercises? I can repeat the question if you guys want. Critical reflexivity, the ability to reflect on our ethics and actions, is fundamentally important in our use of these approaches in public engagement. What are some key things that we should keep in mind while doing critical reflexivity exercises?
Bueno, voy a romper el hielo ahora.
I will take the floor now. I think what I believe is, well, there were a few elements that we have already covered, but they bring me back to this question. We need to give a context to our fights, to our resistance in our country and the different regions through social media. Today, social media is essential to our fight. Social media are here to help. However, we must not forget that access to social media is not equal to everyone. Sadly, well, I'm not going to say sadly, but many people don't have good access to social media. Some other people might have access, but not enough time to be all day long on social media, or we'd rather work face to face with people instead of on through social media. I think that it's also very important to get involved and to be an active participant in this fight against colonialism, against racism, under any shape or form. Our context will give us a different reality, a different perception, but many times our perceptions will share some similarities. For example, regarding migrations, I think all countries have immigration issues. So I think it's appropriate to think of collective action that could get us all together working on this, and something that would allow us to work for a better future. I think this is fundamental. This will also allow us to know leaders of every single domain that we're working on. This colonialism process allowed us to forget, and working together will allow us to remember these leaders, to remember the tools and the resources that they had to conduct their fights. Today, many amongst us are less rebel. We are, in a way, and this is something somebody told me once, before slaves were waken up by the people managing them. Today, we are waken up by an alarm clock. So we need to reflect on this. We need to reflect on the ways in which we are going to resist this. Instead of covering things up, we need to reflect on how to respond, how to set our resistance in motion. It's fundamental for today's world. I would like to take the floor now. I believe that it's also fundamental for us and for many other people who are vulnerable. It's fundamental to break with this Occidental logic that is related deeply to a Christian morale. Colonialization for us is strictly related, if we bear in mind the Spanish conquest. This society had a very strong feeling of relation between state and church. We need to make a clear representation of what our stance is regarding this vast dynamic. Same as our stance regarding mineral exploitation, among other stuff. Today, we can see that it's being conducted in the same way. It all serves a more urban society. And this is something, this is a logic that we need to first of all make more evident and also break with.
I think that these behaviors relate to the commitment towards the community we belong to, we work with. Since members of the international cooperation are also taking place of this event, I would like to call for a reflection and a cooperation and dialogue so that they can also reflect on racism, decolonialism, and the feminist approach. I think probably feminism has been a topic of discussion, but there are lots of different things that still need to be discussed within the colonialized mindset. I think we need to keep on thinking on open a dialogue to try to fill out the gaps of domination. Thank you.
Gracias, Kimi.
Thank you, Kimi.
Is Paula, you want to go next? Go ahead.
Paula, please go ahead. The floor is yours. I agree with Bienvenida and Kimi. I think we need to have a direct contact, not only visiting the community once, but try to get to learn from them, try to learn from different worldviews and different ways of work so that we can open that dialogue, an horizontal dialogue among the different parties, and to actively listening to those projects and ideas. Sometimes we present our proposal or activities, but they sometimes do not necessarily fit into what the communities actually need. Not only their needs, but also what they are actually willing to do. And I think that is really important to have a room for a dialogue and to question ourselves, why are we doing this? What is our role, our position? And uh, we need to also think on our code of ethics, dialogue, right questions, constant reflection on our actions and on our different positions on different matters.
Gracias, Paula. Sonia, you want to go next?
Sure. I agree with a lot of what has been said. Remembering, like I believe, remembering where we came from, why things are the way they are is an important part of the process, right? Like we risk repeating a lot of the things that happened if we don't remember, right? Secondly, the issue of also accountability to ourselves, also to others. And I feel part of accountability to ourselves is being truthful with ourselves about what does it really mean to be decolonial? What does it really mean to be feminist and anti-racist? I'll give an example. Recently, I had a conversation with a colleague of mine who were talking about decolonization. And someone mentioned the fact that also Africa wasn't that perfect before colonization. And maybe that's a thing people tend to pretend like Africa was this utopia before white people came here and they did this. But part of decolonization is also accepting that maybe we're like this and then this came and then that happened. So even as we're trying to create so if maybe it was a patriarchal society, then add colonization on top of that. Now we have patriarchy from the West and you have the patriarchy that you found in that society. So when we're talking feminism, you'll also have to address the patriarchy that existed before, right? You also have to address like the unfair situation or the injustice that existed before colonization happened, or how it interacted with colonization to create the current situation. So accountability in that way. So being truthful to ourselves and also to other people about the situation. And finally, the ability to, or the willingness rather, to learn and to evolve. Because I feel, or rather in my experience as organizers, sometimes we find ourselves hell-bent on proving a certain point, right? Like, if, for example, my definition of feminism, maybe I got into feminism when it was in its second wave, right? But then it has evolved in the fourth wave. We are not welcoming to new ideas. We're not welcoming to new experiences. There's this idea that because it's this, like it can't change. And if you dare change it now, you're questioning everything that I'm about or everything that we're trying to build. You're trying to derail the conversation. So part of critical reflexivity, I feel, is the ability to also, like the openness to learn and to evolve and to, and learn. Yeah, thank you.
All of you ladies have a lot of conviction. That's great. So our third question is, our use of decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist approaches in public engagement has to be deeply connected to broader processes of social justice. This work, therefore, cannot be done in isolation. How can we build relations of trust and solidarity when power is acutely skewed in a sector that is characterized by unequal power relations? I know that we touched base a little bit on these, but if you guys want to expand, that would be great. I can't repeat the question again. Our use of decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist approaches in public engagement has to be deeply connected to these broader processes of social justice. This work, therefore, cannot be done in isolation. How can we build relations of trust and solidarity when power is acutely skewed in a sector that is characterized by unequal power relations? Kimmy and Sonia are giving me, I want to talk faces.
A ver, me lanzo.
Okay. Let me try it first. Okay. When I was listening to your question, and when I actually read it before, one thing that comes to my mind is that we are actually the dream of our ancestors. And we as IU collective believe that that's probably the core of our mission. Even though we are located here in the middle of this colonial government, we have been quite creative. We are sometimes defined as aggressive or violent in the local context. Why? Why is it that? Because power is deeply rooted and it is really hard to be heard. We work with alliances, with partnerships with the different organizations that are similar to us in a way, but we constantly question the system with art, with the academia, with social movement manifestations, with different groups. We even criticize the Spanish government, but on the other hand, we work with migrants, with different minority groups, and not only as a gender-oriented association, but we work with migrants, no matter which nationality, especially those coming from Latin America. And this has meant how decolonial and feminist bodies are represented, such as examples of trans people or non-binary bodies. So we try to be more empathetic so that we can try to recover from that colonial influence. We are looking at different institutional violence in our daily life. So we try to heal suffering. And we also use another phrase. We try to get rid of anger, work with poetry, with performances. We simply pray or sing or play some music so that we can take that anger away from our bodies due to our daily life and restrictions within this country. So in such a way, we expand our logic. It is not only a body of gender-related discussions, but we have created these different ways of acting. We have nowadays a specific action in place for non-documented migrants that fight against the local policies in order to avoid the labeling of migrants. And this is part of our common struggles with other collectives. And this is the way that we can achieve the social justice you refer to. Thank you.
Gracias, Kimi.
Thank you, Kimi.
I see Bienvenida has I want to talk face too.
Ajá, sí, gracias. Bueno,
Thanks.
definitivamente tenemos que romper con las...
Definitely, we need to try to fight against inequality in our society. The power of domination of the others. If we do not break that power will prevail and will keep on doing and acting as they wish. And what Kimi just said are part of those activities that we need to work on. Lots of communities work on different activities. We need to get rid of that anger, and how to do that by the using of several tools, activities. We need to build up a movement that can actually include music, rituals, celebrations, so that they could also be protected within these spaces, because sometimes we have been getting rid of all these different traditions. We need to safeguard our spiritualities and our celebrations. As Latino communities, we have, as Caribbean people, we have our own ways of celebrating. We have our own manifestations. We need to safeguard all these different cultural elements. We have been satanized sometimes, but those practices have meant life, love, love to the others, love to yourself, life in its general term and fight. We need to keep it so that we can try to break that power down, that power that is there that keep us from being us. Thanks.
Gracias, bienvenida.
Thank you, bienvenida.
Do Sonia or Paula want to talk, or do you want me to move to the next question? Go ahead, Paula.
Sí, sí,
Yes.
gracias.
Yes.
Bueno, a mí lo que esta pregunta no me, o sea, las repercusiones que genera en mí, esta pregunta, es volver siempre.
When I heard this question, I think of a dialogue, the active listening I was referring to before.
Por ejemplo, a conocer cómo estas expresiones, por ejemplo, artísticas.
Get to know those artistic expressions that Bienvenida and Kimi share with us. Which are the roles or the importance or meaning of all these different cultural representations? Because they will probably be used as tools to create new language or new reflections. The importance of solidarity. By going even beyond just a common work relationship, I think we should reflect on what we call feminism. I recall once in a meeting with women, some of them said that, or they said, I do not identify as feminist, but their practices and their beliefs were feminist, but they did not necessarily identify it, and they just practice or have those ideas, but they do not necessarily identify the way they work as organizations. So the relationship building could even go beyond simple reflections or meetings, but we should look at probably sharing different languages or feelings. There's some people. Thank you.
Gracias, Paula. Sonia, do you want to make an intervention?
Yeah. I think what Kimi and Mendoza said about dancing is very important. And I think it's also a takeaway that I had from this entire process. I feel over time, the interventions that we come up with to challenge power relations have become very, how do I say, like in our efforts to fight colonialism, we ended up upholding the things that colonial masters said are the right channels of doing things right. So boardrooms, yeah, reports, proposals, that we tend to forget things like dancing, like that too, like things like art, that those two can be used to challenge unequal power relations. Yeah. And secondly, I think an important question to ask is also what is the root cause of this unequal power relations? And I'm sure, like from the report, you've answered it. And I feel as I'll give an example of people like the NGO sector, right? From even our research, from the focus group discussions we had, one of the things that came up is that it's also funders and donors that cause discord among partners in this sector. So once we ask ourselves, like, what is the root cause of this unequal power relations, and we pinpoint maybe it's the funder sowing discord amongst us, right? This pitting of people against each other, that we're going to fund this kind of this thematic area, but not a thematic area, or we're going to fund this organization and not that organization, and now it becomes a source of contention. Now we find ways of now challenging the fund. And I'll give an example of also what has happened in Kenya. I think, is it the Frida Fund that released a report, like after a convening of feminist organizations, where they were like, no, you are the people who come here to sow discord. You are the reason why we cannot work together, because the policies you give us, the areas you force us to work on do not align with what our community needs. Eventually the funders had to listen. And I think right now there's a shift more towards now, instead of being an intermediary that receives money from the north and then they hold it for the community and then disburses it to the community. Now they're looking for community organizations, maybe one community organization that the community has chosen. So it's the community organization that receives the funds on behalf of the community. So I feel once you can pinpoint who causes this unequal power relations, and you realize we are not, like, this other person is not my enemy. Like, they're just, it's more like a screen, like more like, is it a distraction so that you do not see the bigger picture? Now it becomes easier to fight the system or fight the unequal, like to fight the real enemy. Yeah.
Thank you, Sonia. For our last but not least question, I have here, what is a concrete action that sector members can take what is a concrete action that sector members can take as a step towards more decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist approaches in public engagement? Paola, do you want to talk? Or were you talking to yourself?
Si podría repetir la pregunta, por favor.
Could you repeat that question, please?
Of course. What is a concrete action that sector members can take as a step towards a more decolonial, anti-racist, and feminist approaches in public engagement? You can go ahead, Bienvenida.
Okay. Bueno, está bien. Bueno, pienso
Okay.
que
What I believe
debemos, qué sé yo, el sector debe ser contestatario,
is that we need to be more rebel,
innovador también al mismo
to think more critically, to set in motion innovations,
muy fuerte,
to contest all these situations. We need to be creative, to break the structures. We need to look for transformation, transformation within social relationships, beginning by the affirmation of life and the affirmation of community relationships. That is what I believe. Those are the elements that I believe in. We need to support community relationships that are not racialized and take into consideration historical fights that we had to go through. We didn't just arrive here on Earth. We have a history, we have a background, and that is an element that I think is very important. We need to make sure that the intercultural policies are known, that the intercultural knowledge is spread. We need to contest current forms of colonialism that till today are active in all of the social spheres. I also believe that we need to make it known, to make it evident the different ways in which this colonialism is still present. We need to make it more evident. It's only by doing so that we will allow this to be viewed. If this is subtle and not made evident, then we will not be able to see it. To wrap up, I think that there's a debt in Latin America towards the originary people's knowledge. No value whatsoever was given to this kind of knowledge. It was erased. There was an effort to declare them non-valid, and we don't think that is correct. We think that many of those forms that today are not present, however used indirectly, have to be acknowledged. All this knowledge given by our ancestors is something that we have to revindicate. We have to acknowledge it. We have to look for more. And this has to be done by our organizations, by our institutions. Thank you.
Gracias, bienvenida.
Thank you, bienvenida.
Do any of you want to go next?
Pues sigo.
I can take the floor. First of all, I would like to underline that for us, it's been very important to work from a creative side, something that, from an artistic side, something that would allow us to set in motion political fights and to express our stance regarding fights that took place throughout time, to take action and to give a different meaning to these actions, not as something that is new, but something that is set in context, in the context of our fights. Just to give you an example, I think that we have regained different paintings in the caste system. That was something that created historically a racist system. On another note, there were paintings of an author of the 17th century that depicted colonization and the conquest in the American continent. Resignifying these paintings, we were able to say that heterosexuality is a product of colonialism. This heteronormativity is a product of colonialism. The example that I mentioned before of regularización ya by its name in Spanish is something that we have presented to the Congress in Spain. We need 500,000 signatures to back up this request. And even if it's not our initiative or of our own, it belongs to an organization that is within our circuit of organizations. And setting this in motion will allow for the creation or the emergence of different actors, different alliances. This will also allow to criticize the Spanish immigration policies that are also part of the European immigration policies and fight against colonialism and racism and against heteronormativity. Thank you.
Gracias, Kimi.
Thank you, Kimi.
So we are about time for questions, but if Sonia or Paula want to make a quick
On n'a
intervention,
plus vraiment de temps pour les questions, mais si Sonia ou Paolo voudraient parler, on aurait le temps.
Okay, I could go.
Dale.
Yeah. I think part of the concrete actions of part of actively dismantling power relations and public engagement is also not coming or not engaging the public, coming over there as the know-it-all, like I'm here to teach you, but rather in co-creating knowledge with the public. I feel like that is a very concrete action for me. Like in also trying to power relations, like for example, if it's research and I'm coming to you, I'm coming to your community, or like I'm an organization that works within your community and now I want to engage you, like what does that look like, right? And I remember during one of our conversations, I gave the example of how there's this in Nairobi, in Kenya, there's this idea of organizations from Nairobi coming from Nairobi, then going to rural areas or smaller towns, and they're like, now this is the agenda, and we're telling you this is what we need to focus on. When a different approach would be, like, let's co-create this knowledge together. What is your priority? Like, what do we need to work on from, like, what matters to you, right? And part of this, of the colonial practice, I think, is that it's not like part of colonialism is coming and telling people what they need to do because you think you know better. So part of the colonization is working with the people and like co-creating with others and working in solidarity to bring change together. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Sonia.
Bueno, sí, de hecho, lo que yo
What I would like to say is aligned with what Sonia just mentioned regarding concrete and consistent actions that we have to take. Actions that will allow all voices to be heard, not to impose over someone else's voice, but to work together, not to focus on someone's power, but rather to decentralize power. As Sonia mentioned, we're not the only ones who possess knowledge. We need to hear what the other part has to say. I believe that it's fundamental in every action, in everything that every task that we take upon, to allow all the voices to be heard and to allow an exchange of knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you, Sonia, also for squeezing your intervention. So now we can move towards our participants, and I'll leave the floor to you to ask some questions to our panelists. I can see here in the chat that there's some questions in. Okay, so given that most of our work takes place across the global south and not in Canada, most NGOs seem to ignore racial justice consideration to largely focused on gender-related concerns. How do we bring a real and consistent racial justice focus to our work, both in Canada and abroad? You can also look at the questions on the Q&A section of Zoom if you want to give them a look. I can also repeat it if you want. Or I can just pop it in the chat as well. Can you see it in the chat? I can also repeat it again.
Bueno, todas las preguntas están en inglés, no comprendo todo.
Oh, okay.
Well, all the questions are in English and I don't understand. That's a good point. If somebody understands and can share this with me.
Yo escucho lo de español, si quiero puedo intentar como responder cuando hubo la traducción.
I can try to reply once the translation is given.
Okay. Siendo que gran parte del trabajo que se hace es en el sur y no en Canadá, algunas ONGs parecen ignorar la justicia racial, las consideraciones de justicia racial que se enfocan en mayor parte en los problemas de género. ¿Cómo podemos traer justicia racial real y consistente en Canadá y afuera? Oh my gosh, the interpreters make a really good job because translating is really hard.
¿Contestamos ahora? Pregunta, vale.
Should we reply now? Well, I think it's true. All these matters are centered in the South. So since we've discussed the topic of context so largely, the North has to acknowledge that it has a position of privilege, right? So I think it's important to realize this, to realize that there are daily actions that depict a domination, and we need to make this evident. We need to reflect on this, and we need to take into consideration geopolitical contexts. In other words, we need to bear this in mind when setting all these community processes in motion, to be very aware of the imperialistic traits that may be still there, and to establish concrete practices to work against these. We need to reflect on this. I think this is the way to go. Especially, even if it's hard, It's about learning. We need to learn how to fight. It's not only for us to take over this process of criticizing, to studying, to analyzing, has to set this in motion.
And I think that with this process, the idea is to start doing that. I think the process that have started in Canada can be replicated. We have so many organizations involved, so that could be a very good example to follow.
Gracias, Kimi, and bienvenida. I think we have time for one more question. And then for the other questions that participants have asked, those questions are going to be sent to the panelists, and then they're going to answer them, and they're going to be sent back to you. So I can see that Judy put already translated question in the chat. So if any of you want to go ahead and answer it.
Hello. So I'd like to respond to the previous question.
Go ahead.
To add on what was said, it's not just, I feel it's not just about also reflection, it's also about listening to people, right? Like just what we talked about, listening to the voices of the people you're working with. Because I don't think you can talk about gendered violence without talking about colonialism or racial injustice. So if you're really listening to everyone, and all organizers, especially maybe from the South, are telling you racial injustice is our issue. So I feel part of, aside from, like, in addition to reflection, it's also listening, and as what was said earlier, also being able to learn, right? Like just being open, like also admitting, yeah, I made a mistake, but I'm willing to learn and do better. Yeah. So also, let me take this opportunity to say I need to step out, because of another engagement. It's been great and informative. I'm looking forward to those other questions and the information that will come from this. I don't know if it's morning or evening over there. So it's evening over here. Okay, so have a good day, evening, or night, wherever you are. Thank you.
Bye, Sonia. Thank you. If any of you guys want to make a really quick intervention, you have about 1 minute. Or we can just start to wrap up. Or, what do you think, Judy? Or sorry, Joshua.
We can give the panelists a quick minute to say some few final words, and then we can wrap up.
Great.
Either to respond to a question or just to give some final thoughts.
Bueno, comienzo entonces.
Okay, I'll take the floor. Thank you. Thank you, Net, for this whole process. It has been quite enriching and interesting. Thank you for the commitment, for the process, and also thanks to all sister organizations who have been part of this event and other dialogues. Let's keep on fighting. This is not easy. So thank you very much. Well, maybe my turn. I would like to thank you, Annette, as well. We have shared 6 months of focal groups together with our friends. It has been quite an enriching space full of solidarity and horizontal dialogue took place. And it has been a space where all voices were heard, and it's been really nice. Thank you once again. I really like to see that even though we share different contexts, we have different lifestyles, we are so different, but we are so similar. We have so many common ideas, so common points that are part of our life, our bodies, our beings. All those issues that are part of us, and to exchange those with our colleagues have been really exciting, no matter where we were located. So thank you, and hopefully we will meet again in the future. Me too. I would like to thank for this space, for all these months of joint work. Thanks for the experience, the knowledge, the exchange, which created solidarity among individuals, among countries, cultures, organizations, continents. I think that's so much needed and so important in our life and in the way towards transformation we are working on. There's always a begin and it is a cycle. We will start over and over again. We will start from scratch, maybe or maybe not, but we need to try to create solidarity. We need to aim to have equality among all human beings. Thank you all for being part of this session, being part of the discussions, and let's hope that this is not the last time. We should keep on discussing, talking, and sharing experiences in order to actually create a real social transformation. I still have this utopia and I still have this big dream. I think we're all probably aligned and we are seeing some results in our societies. Let's keep on with those.
Thank you, Kimi, Paula, and Bienvenida for that last remarks. And so I'm gonna give the floor to Joshua to wrap up the session.
Thank you, MJ. I would like also to thank Judy and Ed a lot, and to thank Paula, thanks Sonia, Kimi, Bienvenida, and all the research project, ICN research project participants who believed in this project. I will also quote what they said. We will keep up fighting, start over and over again, and we are united by a common goal and objective, as well as a common dream. I would like also to thank all the people who stayed with us, who joined us, and who stayed with us till the end as well. We will share the research findings in our through our newsletter and social media. So stay tuned, and we thank you for everything.